Hello, my name's Ken Oswald, and this is a video book review for my Homiletics course at Winebrenner Theological Seminary. The book that I read about homiletics, or about sermons, was Overhearing the Gospel by Fred Craddock. And when you think about something like Overhearing the Gospel, I suspect that most people's minds go to notions about sermons and things that rant and rail about somebody going to hell, or you doing this, you doing that. Sinful, sinful, sinful. While those are all attention grabbing and they drive home the point that we need Christ. Some of the things that Craddock writes I find equally important. Among them are the ideas he presents in the 3 parts of his book. The first part pertains to things concerning, you might say, ... There are 4 chapters. The first one is concerning method, which is essentially encouraging the idea, or even asking the question, and he asks it several times throughout the book: how can one person communicate the gospel to another? That's the point behind a sermon, is sharing Jesus with somebody else. With the second chapter concerning the listener, Craddock asks the idea, what are the experiences of the other people? What has it been in the life of those who are hearing the sermon? Are they all going to listen? Or will some miss things? He maintains that you might not get everybody to hear all of the sermon, but you want to know your listener so that you can relate to that person, and that hopefully there's a little bit in the sermon for each person to hear, and to hopefully walk away with some better grasp of what you're trying to do with it. And that incidentally leads into the 3rd chapter, which is all about the teller. In many respects, it links to the 2nd chapter with some of the similar ideas of what are the life stories, the life experiences, the style of living and writing and speaking of the person preaching the sermon to the audience. How do you have that rapport? So he emphasizes the idea that knowing and trying to find mutual things helps in what is the 4th part of that 4th chapter of the 1st part. What's the story? How do you hold those people's attention? And again, it boils back to what are those similar life experiences that we stitch together with Scripture to drive home that gospel message. That leads into the 2nd part of his book, which begins with the 5th chapter by way of Kierkegaard. Craddock emphasizes the idea, based on writings of Kierkegaard, that there's a lot of excesses in preaching, things that people hear time and again and essentially begin to roll their eyes, and those things become ineffective at reaching folks. So in chapter 6, he takes into consideration what those things are, and that, again, not too different from what he does in previous chapters. He discusses the idea of knowing your audience. As an example of that, an important point that he drives home inside of chapter 6 about the experience of the listener, he says that I am not asking for recess from vigorous direct communication so that we can all slump into a round of casual conversation. He emphasizes the idea of engaging the different perspectives in an effort so that overhearing isn't just a simple act, but becomes a maneuver that is productive. And again, that connects to his 7th chapter, Method of the Teller, telling a story. His 3rd part of the book concludes with 3 chapters, the first one of which borrows from a scripture, "Don't be afraid," in essence relating to a passage in Matthew of "Fear not." And his emphasis in that chapter is to live, love, and laugh. If you mess up, count it as a living experience, a learning experience. Continue to love yourself and those that may critique your efforts, and learn to laugh at yourself. If you mess up, it's not the end of the world. The bottom line, and this was quite possibly the most striking point to me in the entire book, was on page 146. If there's one thing that a sermon should be all about, he emphasizes, "As for myself, I refuse to allow my religion to be used in the service of anything less than God." So again, that driving home message that it should be, as he concludes in the 10th and final chapter, old story, new ending. Sermons are about God. They're driven to relate to people and to emphasize the idea, what was once said, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And he ultimately concludes that all of our stations in life are a form of richness because they're provided by God. It becomes a sermon in and of itself in the 10th chapter, which I also found to be pretty interesting. It reminded me in many ways, concerns of mine, to include things like staying relevant, staying understandable, and making sure that people understand me and I understand them. In essence, it was a great reminder about the parables of Jesus, to use appropriate cultural references and stories, and to not engage so much in different styles of the same thing over and over that become ineffective. To remember that people need a fresh voice and a fresh vision from time to time, lest they perish. And may we always, as pastors, be able to do that. Thank you for watching. I'm Ken.